The flashing red and blue lights outside my window were the first sign that tonight wasn't going to be ordinary. I wasn't exactly the type to stare out at police activity, but something about the frantic way the officers were moving caught my attention. They weren't just securing a scene. They were scared. I could see it in their body language, the way they clutched their flashlights as if the darkness itself might attack them. Then came the sound. A low, rumbling growl. It wasn't an animal. Not like anything I'd ever heard. Anyway, the street fell dead silent. No dogs barking. No voices. Even the crickets stopped chirping. I was about to turn away, pretending it wasn't my business, when my phone buzzed. A message. Stay inside. Don't open your door. It was an unknown number. Before I could think twice, there was a pounding knock at my front door. 3 sharp raps. I froze, my heart hammering. The cops were still out there, their flashlights flickering as they shouted commands I couldn't make out. But nobody was at my door. No shadow visible through the frosted glass. Another knock, louder this time. Then a voice, calm, steady, and chillingly close. Police, open up. I stayed frozen in place, my breath shallow and my body glued to the floor like I'd forgotten how to move. The voice outside repeated itself, louder this time. Police, open the door. But something was wrong. There was no urgency, no concern in the tone, just a flat, mechanical demand. I crept closer to the door, peeking through the peephole. What I saw made my stomach flip. It was a cop, or at least someone dressed like one. He had the uniform, badge, even the utility belt with a radio clip to it. But his face, it wasn't right. His skin looked stretched too tightly over his skull, and his eyes, though facing forward, didn't blink. Not once. Ma'am, it's not safe. Open the door, he said again. His voice steady and monotone. No emotion, like he was reading a script. The pounding started again, so loud it rattled the hinges. I backed away, my mind racing. The police cars were still parked down the street, but none of the officers outside seemed to notice the one at my door. Were they even real cops? What the hell was going on? Then my phone buzzed again. I snatched it off the counter, and the unknown number sent a new message. Whatever you do, don't let him in. He's not one of us. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't reply. My fingers hovered over the screen, trying to figure out what to do. Call 911? But if this guy wasn't a real cop, how could I trust whoever picked up? The pounding stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I stood there, holding my breath, staring at the door like it might explode off its frame. Then came the sound. A scratching, almost like claws dragging across the wood. Ma'am. The voice was quieter now, almost playful. You really don't want to make me do this. I bolted into the kitchen, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. A knife. Something heavy. I grabbed a cast iron pan, gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft and raspy, coming from somewhere above me. You're not alone. My blood ran cold. I looked up, and the vent above my kitchen stove was rattling. It wasn't the wind. Something was moving inside it. The rattling in the vent grew louder, more frantic. I tightened my grip on the pan, my eyes fixed on the metal grill. The whispers continued, soft but unmistakable. Come out! Come out! Suddenly, the pounding on the front door started again, harder than ever. The wood groaned under the force, but my attention stayed locked on the vent. My brain screamed for me to run, to get out of the house, but where could I go? If whatever was outside wasn't safe, then what the hell was inside? And then it happened. The vent cover snapped off, clattering onto the stove, and something dropped out. At first, all I saw was a mass of pale limbs, spider-like in the way they folded and twisted. The thing unfolded itself slowly, deliberately, as if it knew I couldn't look away. Its skin was ashen, almost translucent, and its face, or what should have been a face, was a blank oval, smooth and featureless. But it had a mouth, a wide, gaping hole filled with jagged teeth, stretching far too long across its head. Couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they'd been cemented to the floor. The thing turned its head, or at least its mouth, towards me and let out a low, guttural clicking sound. Then it scuttled forward. I screamed, swinging the pan with every ounce of strength I had. The impact echoed like a gunshot in the small kitchen, and the thing recoiled, slamming into the cabinets. It didn't bleed. Instead, the spot where I'd hit it sank inward like putty before slowly reforming. The creature hissed, a sound so unnatural it made my ears ring, and it lunged again. I stumbled backward, barely dodging as it slammed into the fridge. Its limbs scrambled against the smooth surface, claws carving deep gouges into the metal. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, it froze. The pounding on the front door stopped too. The silence was deafening. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The creature twisted its head toward the front of the house, as if it were listening for something. Its limbs twitched erratically, and then it darted impossibly fast, out of the kitchen and down the hall, toward the front door. I heard the deadbolt click. The door creaked open, and then came the voice again, no longer outside but inside my house. "Ma'am, I told you to open the door." My knees buckled, and I hit the floor as the voice echoed down the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps followed, the sound of boots on hardwood. "Why'd you make me come in?" the voice said, flat and cold. "I don't like when people don't listen." The kitchen lights flickered. Shadows from the dim bulb above swayed across the walls like they had lives of their own. I couldn't stop shaking. Whatever that thing was in the vent, it had let someone or something inside, and now they were both in the house. I crawled toward the back door on my hands and knees, moving as quietly as I could. The cast iron pan was still in my hand, but it felt useless now. My phone was in my pocket, though calling for help seemed pointless. Who would believe me? As I reached the door, I heard a faint whisper behind me. "You can't run." I whipped my head around, but the hallway was empty. The kitchen stretched out in eerie silence, the fridge door still dented from where the thing had slammed into it. My heart raced. I turned back to the door and fumbled with the lock, hands trembling so hard I almost couldn't grip it. Click. The lock slid open, and I pulled the door ajar. But before I could step outside, I froze. Something was wrong. The backyard wasn't right. It was too dark, pitch black, like someone had erased it with a marker. Even the faint glow of the neighbor's porch light, which was always on, was gone. And then I saw it. 2 pinpricks of light, glowing faintly in the void, hovering just beyond the threshold. They weren't eyes, not exactly, but they watched me all the same, unblinking. A low, guttural growl rose from the darkness, vibrating deep in my chest. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder. "You're not going anywhere," the voice said, closer now. Too close. I could feel the chill radiating from it, like the air itself was being sucked away. I slammed the back door shut and spun around. The man, or whatever he was, stood at the edge of the kitchen, his figure framed in the dim light. His face was pale, impossibly thin, and his eyes, God, his eyes, they glowed faintly, the same cold light as the pinpricks outside. "You shouldn't have opened the door," he said. Before I could react, the creature from the vent skittered out of the shadows, perching on the wall like some grotesque spider. Its mouth gaped open, emitting a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a scream. "Leave me alone," I shouted, swinging the pan wildly. The man didn't flinch. His gaze was locked on mine, unblinking, unfeeling. "You think you're the first to try," he said, his lips barely moving. "This house belongs to us now." The creature lunged. I ducked, feeling the rush of air as its claws raked the space where my head had been. It landed behind me, blocking the door again. I was trapped, but then my phone buzzed. I yanked it out of my pocket, desperate for any lifeline. The unknown number had sent another message. "Get to the basement. Now!" The basement. My stomach twisted at the thought of descending into the darkness, but the message on my phone was clear. Whatever was happening, whoever was texting me, they knew more than I did. And right now, they were my only shot. The man took a step closer, his boots heavy on the creaking floor. The creature mirrored his movement, its claws clicking against the tiles. They weren't in a hurry. They knew they had me cornered. I bolted for the hallway. "Stop her," the man growled, his voice losing its monotone and slipping into something deeper, more guttural. The creature screeched, launching itself after me. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, skidding on the hardwood as I made it to the basement door. My hand fumbled for the handle. I yanked it open and hurled myself down the steps, slamming the door shut behind me. The creature hit it with a deafening thud, its claws scraping against the wood. The sound made my skin crawl, but I didn't stop. I stumbled down the stairs in the dim light of a single, flickering bulb, nearly tripping over the last step. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of mildew. Shadows stretched across the concrete walls, and the old boiler in the corner hissed like it was alive. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I had to keep moving. Another buzz from my phone. Find the red toolbox. Open it. My eyes darted around the room until I spotted it. A battered, rusted toolbox sitting on an old workbench. I ran to it, flipping open the latches with trembling fingers. Inside was a handgun, a flashlight, and a single note scrawled in hurried, messy handwriting. Shoot them in the eyes. I barely had time to process the instructions before the basement door exploded inward. Splinters rained down the stairs as the creature scuttled into the room, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. Behind it, the man loomed in the doorway, his glowing eyes fixed on me. I grabbed the gun, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The creature lunged, its jaws snapping inches from my face. I screamed and fired. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and the recoil nearly knocked me off my feet. The bullet hit the creature square in its left eye, and it let out a shriek so piercing I thought my eardrums might burst. Black ichor sprayed from the wound as it writhed, its limbs flailing wildly before collapsing in a twitching heap. I barely had a moment to breathe before the man was on me. He moved faster than any human should, his hand gripping my wrist like a vice. His glowing eyes bored into mine, and I felt something wrong, pressing into my mind, like icy fingers digging through my thoughts. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed, his voice layered with something ancient, something monstrous. I didn't think. I just aimed the gun at his face and pulled the trigger. The bullet shattered his left eye, and his grip on me slackened. He staggered back, clutching at the wound as smoke poured from the socket. His voice roared, but it wasn't words anymore. It was an inhuman howl, reverberating through the walls. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed the flashlight and ran for the back of the basement, my shoes slipping on the damp concrete. There was a small window just large enough to squeeze through. I climbed onto an old crate, shoved the window open, and hauled myself outside. The night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran through the yard, past the eerie darkness where the glowing eyes had been, and kept going until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. I ran until I couldn't anymore, my chest heaving and my legs trembling. When I finally stopped, I was in a park on the edge of the neighborhood, shrouded in silence except for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The gun felt heavy in my hand, the flashlight still clutched in the other. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the shadows, expecting to see glowing eyes or hear the man's guttural voice at any moment. But there was nothing, just the oppressive stillness of the night. My phone buzzed again. "Keep moving. They aren't done." The words sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through me. Who was sending these messages? How did they know what was happening? Before I could respond, a new message came through. "There's a safe house, old brick building, 2 blocks east. Get there now." I didn't think. I couldn't afford to. I switched on the flashlight and sprinted toward the direction the text had indicated, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. The streets were deserted, and every shadow felt like it was watching me. The houses I passed were eerily silent, their windows dark like empty, lifeless eyes. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, quick and heavy, pounding against the pavement behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, the old brick building coming into view at the end of the street. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up and the paint peeling off in strips. But the door was slightly ajar, and a faint light glowed from within. I reached the door and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the room. It was empty except for a table, a chair, and a large chalk circle drawn on the floor, lined with symbols I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed again. Stay in the circle. Don't step out, no matter what happens. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to question everything, but the sound of the footsteps outside snapped me into action. I stepped into the circle, the symbols glowing faintly under my feet. The door rattled violently. The thing outside, it wasn't just the man, it wasn't just the creature. I could hear both of them, their unnatural voices blending into something that made my skin crawl. "Let us in," the man growled, his voice distorted. "We just want to talk." The creature screeched, its claws raking against the door. My heart pounded as the symbols around the circle glowed brighter, humming with energy. The air inside the room felt charged, like a storm was about to break. The door burst open and they came in. The man's face was half gone, his shattered eye oozing black smoke. The creature followed, its body twitching and writhing as it crawled along the walls. They moved toward me, but the moment they crossed the edge of the circle, they stopped. The symbols flared, a blinding light erupting from the floor. The man howled, his voice mingling with the creature's screech as they thrashed against the invisible barrier. Their forms began to twist, the air around them warping like heat waves. The light grew brighter, burning their shapes into grotesque shadows before they finally dissolved into nothing. And then it was quiet. The glow faded, leaving me standing alone in the dim room. My phone buzzed one last time. "It's over. Leave now. Don't look back." I didn't need to be told twice. I stepped out of the circle, my legs shaky but functional, and made my way back outside. The night was still and quiet, the stars glittering in the sky as if nothing had happened. I walked away from the building, my mind racing, trying to process everything. But as I reached the end of the street, I couldn't resist the urge to glance back. The building was gone. There was only an empty lot where it had stood moments before. I stood frozen, staring at the empty lot where the building had been. My mind scrambled for answers, but none came. It wasn't just gone. It had never been there. The ground was bare, overgrown with weeds, as if nothing had touched it for decades. The faint hum of approaching sirens pulled me back to reality. Red and blue lights glinted off the darkened windows of the nearby houses as a squad car turned onto the street. For the first time that night, the sight of police didn't fill me with dread. 2 officers got out of the car, their faces cautious but professional. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, approached me slowly. "Ma'am, are you okay? We got reports of a disturbance in the area." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. What could I even say? That monsters had invaded my home? That something inhuman had hunted me through the night? My voice cracked. "I don't know. I think I'm safe now." The officer studied me, her gaze flicking to the gun in my hand. "Mind if I take that?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. I handed it over without hesitation. The weight of it leaving my hand felt like shedding part of the nightmare. "Do you need medical attention?" the other officer asked, a younger man with a concerned expression. I shook my head, though my whole body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. "No, I need to go." The officers exchanged a look, then the woman nodded. "We'll give you a ride. But first, we need your statement." I didn't argue. They walked me to the car, and as I slid into the back seat, I glanced at the lot one last time. It was still empty, the weeds swaying gently in the breeze. At the station, I gave them the cleanest version of the truth I could muster. A strange man had tried to break into my house. I fled. That was it. They didn't press too hard. My ragged appearance and the haunted look in my eyes probably said more than I could. But as I sat in the fluorescent-lit interview room, waiting for them to finish processing my statement, a small detail nagged at me. My phone. I pulled it out of my pocket, scrolling through the messages. They were still there, each warning, each instruction, but the number was gone. No contact, no history, just a blank screen where the sender's information should have been. A shiver ran down my spine. The officer returned and handed me a cup of water. "We're done here," she said gently. "If you need anything, or if you remember something else, don't hesitate to call." I nodded, forcing a weak smile, and left the station. The streets outside were quiet again, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew something was out there, watching, waiting, and as I walked home, the memory of those glowing eyes lingered in my mind, a shadow that would never fully leave. I was alive but not safe. Not really, because the text had said, "It's over," but it never said, "It's gone." I made it home by dawn, the rising sun casting a pale glow over the neighborhood. My house looked the same as always, but it felt foreign now, tainted by everything that had happened inside. Every creak of the floorboards and flicker of the lights sent a jolt through me as I stepped inside. The front door was splintered where the creature had smashed through, but otherwise the house was eerily normal. Too normal. The fridge door was no longer dented. The vent in the kitchen ceiling had been replaced, and the basement door hung perfectly on its hinges. I didn't have time to question it. Exhaustion hit me like a freight train, and I collapsed onto the couch, clutching the blanket draped over the back. I told myself I'd just rest for a moment, just long enough to think straight. When I woke, the sun was high in the sky, and my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I grabbed it, half expecting another cryptic message, but it was just a voicemail from the police station. The officer who had taken my statement wanted to check in, her tone kind but businesslike. Something about her words unsettled me, though. "We couldn't find any evidence of a break-in at your house. Are you sure you don't remember anything else?" I hung up without replying. Evidence or not, I knew what I'd seen, what I'd fought, what I'd survived. But as the day dragged on, small things began to gnaw at me. The dent in the fridge, the symbols in the basement, they were gone, completely erased as if they'd never existed. Even the messages on my phone had vanished again. I started questioning myself. Had it all been some kind of vivid nightmare? Stress-induced hysteria? But the ache in my wrist from where the man had grabbed me, and the memory of the gun's recoil, told me it was real. That night, I stayed up, too scared to close my eyes. I left every light in the house on, the gun from the toolbox resting on the coffee table. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., then 2. The house stayed quiet, but outside, the wind howled. Branches scratched against the windows, and the faint hum of passing cars drifted through the walls. And then, just before 3 a.m., I heard it. A knock at the door. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. I froze. My stomach dropped, and my heart thundered in my chest. For a long moment, I didn't move, hoping whoever or whatever it was would just leave. Then came the voice. "Ma'am," it said, calm and steady. "This is Officer Carter. I need to speak with you about your statement." The officer from last night, the one who had driven me to the station. But something was wrong. Her voice. It was flat, devoid of the warmth I remembered. I grabbed the gun, my hands trembling, and crept to the door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw her standing there, her face pale and expressionless, her uniform pristine. But her eyes, they glowed faintly in the dark. The floor beneath me groaned, and her head snapped toward the sound. She smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of her lips, and spoke again. "Let me in." I stumbled backward, clutching the gun. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A new message. "Don't let her inside. Whatever you do, don't let her inside." My blood turned to ice. My grip on the gun tightened as the knocks on the door grew louder, more insistent. The smile on her face widened, splitting impossibly far. "Ma'am," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "You can't hide forever." Then she stopped knocking. The silence was worse. I spun around, scanning the room, every shadow suddenly alive with possibility. And that's when I saw it. A faint glow coming from the vent above the kitchen. The same glow I'd seen in the creature's eyes. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the glow seeping out of the kitchen vent. It pulsed faintly, almost alive, like it was breathing. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The knock came again, louder this time, like a battering ram against the door. "Let me in," the voice outside demanded, no longer sounding like Officer Carter. It had deepened, layered with something guttural and inhuman. "You're already ours." The glow in the vent grew brighter, and then the cover snapped open with a sharp metallic clang. I raised the gun instinctively, my heart pounding as the air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me. Something was in there, something that had never left. I aimed the gun at the vent, my hands trembling. The same message from before flashed across my mind. Shoot them in the eyes, but then the glow in the vent faded. The house fell silent, save for my own ragged breathing. My finger hovered over the trigger, waiting for movement, but there was nothing, just the empty blackness of the vent. Then, behind me, a whisper, "You're in the wrong place." I spun around, the gun clattering to the floor as I came face to face with her. Officer Carter, if it was still her, was standing in my living room, her head tilted unnaturally to the side, her glowing eyes locked on mine. Her smile stretched wide, impossibly wide, her teeth too sharp, too many. I stumbled back, grabbing for the gun, but before I could reach it, the lights in the house flickered violently and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. Her voice came again, close and deafening, surrounding me from every angle. "You think you've escaped," she hissed, the words slithering into my ears. "But you never left." I scrambled to my feet, gripping the gun as I blindly felt my way toward the front door. My only thought was to get out, to get away, but my steps felt sluggish, as if the air itself had thickened into a swamp. I finally reached the door, pulling it open, but the world outside wasn't my street anymore. It was the void, the same pitch-black nothingness I'd seen the night before, with its glowing pinpricks of light floating in the distance. They were closer now, circling, watching. The air smelled of ash and decay, and a deep, low growl reverberated all around me. From behind, Carter's distorted voice whispered again, directly into my ear, "There's nowhere to go. You belong to us." I turned to face her, the gun shaking in my grip. She was only inches away now, her eyes burning brighter than ever, her smile splitting her face wide open. With a scream, I aimed and fired. The bullet struck her square in the eye, and the light exploded outward, blinding me. She let out an ear-splitting shriek, her form flickering and distorting like a broken video. But as she dissolved into the air, the void began to close in. The glowing pinpricks moved closer, faster, and I could feel their heat, their hunger. I ran. When I woke, I was lying in the middle of my living room floor. The morning sun streamed through the windows, and the house was silent. Normal, but I knew it wasn't over. The house may have looked the same, but something had shifted. The air felt wrong, heavier, like it was watching me. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. And yet, as I stood there, staring at the blank screen, a final thought wormed its way into my mind. If the void had let me go, it wasn't because I'd escaped. It was because it wanted me to bring someone back. The air in my house felt suffocating, thick with an invisible weight pressing down on me. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of the refrigerator sounded amplified, distorted, like the house itself was alive and watching me. I couldn't stay here, not after everything that had happened. I grabbed my keys, phone, and the gun, still cold and heavier than it had any right to be, and headed for the door. The splintered wood where the creature had broken in the night before was still there, a haunting reminder. But as I stepped onto the porch, I felt it again, that oppressive silence. No birds, no wind, no sounds of distant cars, just silence. The neighborhood was deserted. Cars were parked along the street, driveways were full, but there was no movement. No lights on in the houses, no people walking dogs or mowing lawns. It was as if the entire world had paused. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I decided to call someone, anyone. But every number I dialed rang and rang until an automated voice informed me the call couldn't be completed. The chill creeping up my spine grew colder. I turned toward the street, determined to leave on foot if I had to. But as I took my first step onto the pavement, I saw it. A figure at the end of the block. They were standing perfectly still, too far to make out any features, but something about their stance was wrong. They weren't just standing, they were waiting. My heart raced. I turned to walk the other way, but as I did, another figure appeared. Then another, and another. They emerged from between houses, stepped out of shadows, all moving silently into the street to form a loose circle around me. The glow. I didn't notice it at first, but their eyes began to light up faintly, one by one. The same cold, otherworldly glow I'd seen in the man, the creature, and Carter. I raised the gun, my hands trembling. "Stay back!" I shouted, but my voice felt swallowed by the heavy air. The figures didn't flinch. They just stood there watching, waiting, and then, in unison, they pointed at me. A piercing ring filled the air, making me drop the gun and clutch my ears. It wasn't just sound. It was vibration, pressure, an invading force pressing against my skull. I staggered back, trying to scream, but no sound came out. The ringing built to a crescendo, and I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face from the pain. When it stopped, the street was empty again. The figures were gone, but I wasn't alone. My phone buzzed, the vibration rattling against the concrete. I fumbled to pick it up, and a new message appeared on the screen. "You can't leave. Bring someone back, or they'll come for you again." My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I typed out a desperate response. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" For a long moment, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the phone. And then, a single reply, "You're one of us now. Welcome home." The words sank into my chest like lead. I stumbled back inside, locking the door behind me even though I knew it was useless. This wasn't my home anymore. It was theirs. As the sun began to set, I sat in the living room, gripping the gun and staring at the door. I didn't know who or what I'd bring back, but the glow outside was already returning, faint pinpricks in the deepening shadows. And they were getting closer. The glow outside my house grew stronger, pulsating like a heartbeat. Every instinct told me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The figures, whatever they were, would always find me. That much was clear now. I sat frozen in the living room, the gun resting in my lap, the phone clenched tightly in my hand. The last message lingered on the screen. The words seared into my mind. "You're one of us now. Welcome home." But what did that mean? What did they want? The glow crept closer, seeping through the cracks in the blinds, spilling into the room like liquid light. My heart raced as I stared at it, the shapes of the figures outside becoming clearer. They weren't human anymore, if they ever had been. Their limbs were too long, their heads tilted at impossible angles. The faint glow of their eyes burned brighter, locking onto me as if they could see through the walls. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps just like before. But this time they weren't at the door. They were at the window. I turned slowly, my stomach lurching. One of the figures stood pressed against the glass, its glowing eyes burning like twin suns. Its mouth, if you could call it that, twitched and jerked, splitting open into a grotesque grin. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The knock came again, louder now, shaking the glass. Behind me, the phone buzzed. Another message. "Open the door." I stared at the screen, my mind screaming at me to ignore it, to fight back, to do anything but what they wanted. But as the glow outside grew brighter, the house itself began to change. The walls groaned and shifted, the air growing thick and heavy, suffused with the smell of burning. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw the shadows moving, coiling like living things. The phone buzzed again. "You can't resist. Let us in." "No," I whispered, clutching the gun tighter. My voice felt small, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. "Leave me alone." The figure at the window didn't move, but its grin widened, splitting its face in two. Then it began to speak. Not with words, but with something deeper, something that burrowed into my mind like a knife. "You belong to us now. Stop fighting." I screamed, the sound raw and guttural, and fired a shot at the window. The glass shattered, the glow exploding inward, and the figure dissolved into a cloud of ash. For a moment, the room was still, the oppressive air lifting slightly. But then I heard the front door creak open. I spun around, the gun trembling in my grip. The door stood ajar, swinging gently on its hinges. The hallway beyond was dark, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere deep within. They were inside. I backed away, my breathing shallow, my mind racing. The phone buzzed once more, the screen lighting up with a single word: run. But where could I go? If I left the house, the figures outside would close in. If I stayed, whatever was inside would find me. My hands shook as I aimed the gun at the hallway, the darkness staring back at me like a living thing. And then I saw it. A single, glowing eye appeared in the shadows, followed by another, and another. The figures emerged, one by one, their twisted forms filling the hallway, their eyes burning brighter than ever. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, watching. The glowing eyes multiplied, filling the hallway like a swarm of fireflies born from a nightmare. My back hit the wall, the gun trembling in my grip. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. But I didn't dare move. I didn't blink. The figures stood still, their forms half hidden in the dark, watching me with an unnatural patience that felt worse than any sudden attack. Then one of them stepped forward. Its head tilted slowly, almost curiously, and the glow of its eyes brightened, casting twisted shadows along the walls. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. I raised the gun and fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet struck the figure dead center. It staggered back, its body flickering like a broken video projection. But it didn't fall. Instead, it straightened, its glowing eyes now fixed on me with a kind of amusement. Behind it, the others moved closer. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." The phone buzzed again in my pocket. With trembling hands, I pulled it out and stared at the screen. "You can't kill them, but you can end this." My stomach twisted as another message appeared almost instantly. "The basement. Go now." I stared at the words, the memory of the symbols in the basement flashing through my mind. The thought of going back down there made my blood run cold. But the figures were already advancing. Their glowing eyes burned brighter, and the air grew heavy with the scent of burning metal and ash. I had no choice. I ran. The hallway seemed to stretch longer as I moved, the walls warping, twisting. The sound of footsteps followed me, heavy and deliberate. My breath came in ragged gasps as I threw myself down the stairs to the basement, my feet barely touching the steps. The moment I reached the bottom, the symbols flared to life, glowing faintly on the floor where I'd last seen them. But now they were incomplete, faint lines smeared and broken like they'd been hastily wiped away. The phone buzzed again. "Fix the circle. Hurry." I dropped to my knees, frantically scanning the room for anything to draw with. My eyes landed on a piece of broken chalk lying near the edge of the circle. I grabbed it and began tracing over the faded lines, my hands trembling so badly the chalk snapped in half. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were at the top of the stairs. Sweat dripped down my face as I completed the last line of the circle. The symbols flared to life, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that made the air hum. I crawled to the center, clutching the gun and my phone as the first figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs. It stepped toward the edge of the circle, its glowing eyes locked on mine. The others followed, filling the basement until there was no room left to run. They surrounded me, standing just outside the circle, their forms flickering like distorted shadows. And then they began to speak, not in words but in thoughts, alien and invasive, pouring into my mind like a flood. Images of the void, of endless darkness, of others like me being consumed and twisted into something new. "You're ours now," they said, their voices overlapping into a deafening cacophony. "There's no escape, no salvation." The symbols flared brighter, and the figures recoiled slightly, their forms rippling as if in pain. I felt a surge of hope, but it was fleeting. The glow around the circle was fading, flickering like a dying flame. The phone buzzed one last time. "Finish it. Say the words." "What words?" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "What do I say?" But no answer came. The phone screen went dark, and the light from the circle dimmed further. The figures stepped closer, their twisted forms flickering like static as they reached the edge of the circle. And then I remembered the note in the toolbox, the one that had given me the gun. One line stuck out in my mind: "Speak to send them back." The problem was, I didn't know what to say. The circle's light was failing, dimming with each passing second. The figures loomed closer, their glowing eyes burning into me as if they could see every inch of my fear. My mind raced, trying to piece together what the cryptic messages had been guiding me toward. Speak to send them back. But how? What words? I stared at the glowing symbols, hoping they held the answer, but they only pulsed faintly, offering no solace. The figures pressed closer, the edges of their distorted forms beginning to seep into the circle. Their voices whispered, louder now, more insistent. "You belong to us. You can't escape." And then it hit me. The note hadn't said to know the words. It had said to speak. Maybe it wasn't about understanding. Maybe it was about intent, about standing my ground against whatever these things were. My entire body trembled as I rose to my knees, clutching the gun with one hand and holding the broken chalk in the other like a talisman. I closed my eyes and began to speak. "I don't belong to you," I said, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. "This is my home, my mind. You can't take it." The figures stopped, their forms flickering violently, the air around them warping. The circle flared brighter, pulsing in rhythm with my words. "You're not welcome here. Go back to where you came from," I shouted, pouring every ounce of desperation, anger, and fear into the words. "Leave me alone." The glow of the symbols surged, flooding the room with blinding light. The figures let out a collective scream, a sound that rattled my bones and made the air feel like it was tearing apart. Their forms dissolved, twisting and writhing as they were pulled backward, dragged toward the edges of the circle. One by one, they disappeared, swallowed by the void. The last to go was the figure with the widest grin, its glowing eyes locking onto mine until the very end. It didn't scream, it didn't resist. It simply vanished, leaving only the faint scent of ash behind. The room fell silent. The symbols faded, their glow extinguishing as the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I collapsed to the floor, the gun clattering out of my hand. My chest heaved, my throat raw from shouting. The basement was still again eerily normal, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The next morning, I boarded up the shattered front door and threw the toolbox into the trash. The gun went with it. I didn't want any reminders of that night. I didn't check my phone, didn't reply to the officer's voicemail, didn't step foot in the basement again. The house was quiet, but not in the way it used to be. Felt hollow now, like a shell of what it once was. I knew the figures were gone, for now, but their whispers lingered in the back of my mind, a faint hum I couldn't shake. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, the silence was broken by a sound that made my blood run cold. 3 sharp knocks at the door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again, louder this time. And then, a voice, calm, steady, and hauntingly familiar. "Let us in."